Okay, it's the Husk Unfiltered Radio made in Brighton on this week's show. I say this week's show, suggesting that it's a weekly show, which it clearly isn't. But we've got Duncan Blinkhorn. He is a well-known local environmental activist, very active in the cycling scene. You probably, if you live in Brighton, you probably best know him for being not the organiser, but one of the key organisers of the World Naked Bike Ride, or at least the Brighton leg of that event. That interview's coming up in a second. We sort of ran out now very much of, well, not ran out, I suppose. I'm sure there are very interesting people I know that I haven't interviewed or thought to interview, but nonetheless, if you can think of anybody that would make a good interview, or you think you would make a good interview and you'd like to be on the show, please get in touch, because I am looking for people. Anyway, here's Duncan. Duncan, welcome to the Husk. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Good to be here.
Good, thank you for coming down. What we'll do is I'll start by describing you as best as I know, and you can tell me whether I'm right, wrong, or I've missed anything out.
Okay.
So I'm going to say that you are a environmental activist who is very centred around bicycles. Yeah. You're here in Brighton. You have been heavily involved, probably centrally involved, I think it's fair to say, in the running of the Brighton leg of the World Naked Bike Ride, which we'll obviously talk about. You've also been involved in Bike Chain, which is, I think, a sort of group organised cycling commute. I think that's the way I can describe it. I think you were involved in the Lewis Road Clean Air Act, which was to attempt to obviously clean up the air in Lewis Road, very polluted street in Brighton. Brighton's a very polluted city, really, in terms of air quality, my understanding is. You're also involved in the Lewis Road Community Garden, which was a piece of abandoned land that the community took over. Legally, illegally, I don't know, but set up some sort of kind of gardening there for a while. Now it's a bloody Morrison's or whatever, but it was cool at the time. And I think that is that describing you well enough, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And the last few years I've been coordinating the Brighton Bike Hub, which is a community workshop just off the Lewis Road, and a lot of these things are connected in terms of how they've come about.
What's the Bike Hub? Is that similar to kind of Cranks? Or?
It's a community cycle workshop, very, very like Cranks. Yeah, so drop in, do it yourself, and we take most of the city's abandoned bikes as well and do them up for resale.
Okay.
So it's all part of helping people get on a bike, stay on a bike affordably.
Sure. Now, the first thing I wanted to ask you, because I know I've kind of vaguely, we don't know each other, but I've seen you around. I've spoken to you a few times over the years when I had longer hair. You have been very central to things, especially I know the bike ride, the naked bike ride you've been really fundamental in. And that's been going on for what, how many years? 10, 12 years? Is it something like that?
Yeah, more than 15 years
15
now.
years,
2006 it started in Brighton, yeah.
How is it that you, because my experience is we get a lot of people who get involved in sort of activism, protest scenes, and then you get the people that really get involved, like yourself. But I do tend to notice a lot of people burn out. How have you managed to stay so resilient, or have you burnt out?
Right, okay. It can be full on at times, and I guess I try and enjoy it where I can, and try not to overstretch. I probably do overstretch myself, but I think the main thing is to enjoy it and be around an amazing team of people that help and get on with things themselves and take initiative and be part of that and not too isolated in it, I think. So, yeah, still here, still going at the moment.
Do you still have faith that the sort of things that you're involved in might... I mean, I guess like the huge idealistic aim is to sort of spark a revolution, right? I mean, that's what we... Do you still think the world can be saved, or...
I don't know, when it comes to climate change, we're just leaving it way too late and doing far too little, as loads of people are saying. And, you do what you can do, don't you? I do what I can do, and I'm one of hundreds of thousands, millions of people around the world doing a little bit here and there, and very committed to changing the way we we do things to bring about some sort of solution. I don't hold up a lot of hope long term, actually. But then you have to have some sort of hope to keep going. And there are amazing things going on there. You know, wouldn't want to be too negative. And
of course.
And so you do what you can and you keep going at it, and you hope that other people are doing the same, which they are, but of course not enough.
Has that perspective changed over time? Did you have more hope kind of in the past, or did you always feel a little bit like, my God, we've really screwed this up?
I think I did have more hope. I mean, I remember, you know, I was part of a group of people that cycled to the 2015 Paris COP21.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And you know, that was a successful global conference in many ways, but and I think we came out of that a bit more optimistic than many of us went in. But also 2015 was also, by many measures, considered the point at which we needed to have peaked in terms of emissions and start a pretty sharp decline. And we didn't peak then, and I'm not sure that we have peaked yet. Yeah. And so every year that we haven't peaked and we've not turned that corner is quite a big deal in terms of actually just not getting there. And that's kind of, now we're 6 years on from that. We got the Glasgow COP, which is probably the first really big COP since the Paris one, and still we haven't peaked on emissions. There's more political will than I think there was, but way short of what there needs to be.
We will brighten this conversation later. But it just reminds me when you're talking about this. So I was, to some extent, involved in kind of climate camp movement back in the day. And I was doing a lot more activism. I kind of don't really do any activism anymore, to be honest. But I was vaguely involved in these things. And I remember we had the kind of transition towns movement and all of that kind of stuff. And, you know, I feel like back then people felt very excited and people did genuinely believe that this might be an opportunity to really change things. Now, obviously, we have groups like Extinction Rebellion, and I look at them and I just feel disillusioned. I do wish them the best, but it's like I think I have the same sense of like, my God, I just don't know if it's possible anymore. And we seem to now have this sort of mainstream political capitalist sort of answers, if you like, not necessarily good answers, but answers to how we're going to deal with the problem. But they don't seem that they're not a kind of a revolution, really. They're just business as usual. Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm very excited by Extinction Rebellion. It's what's been needed. It's you know, carried the torch for that kind of direct action, and taken it to a very big audience and to a lot of it's engaged a lot of people in it. So absolutely brilliant. It's what's been needed. It's what was needed 10, 20 years ago. It's what was going on 10 or 20 years ago in a way, but I think it's doing it on a bigger scale and with more people, and it's brought again a sense of urgency to the issue. And I mean, implicit in a lot of this activism is a critique of how we are organised economically and of capitalism in that. I mean, when I think of the Brighton Bike Hub and what we're doing there, we've got an amazing team of volunteers, 25, 30 people, giving loads of time, helping people get on their bikes and to stop the waste of chucking all this stuff away and actually making the best of the waste that is abandoned bikes. But you know, in the current system, it's not viable for people to get jobs out of that, or even to be able to afford to pay the rent somewhere really central. And it just flags up the limits of a system where everyone says what we're doing is great and there's clearly a need for it. And yet it's more viable economically to get loads of bikes made cheaply in China and then carried across the ocean and put in a high street shop and sold, and then a year or two later, you know, left on the streets abandoned. And that is still the dominant model, just within, and that goes for almost every other industry, really. So there's loads of people struggling away, looking at the circular economy, reusing stuff, repairing stuff, and yet it doesn't add up to something that is obviously viable within
the system as we have it, and you don't have mainstream political parties really trying to get to grips with how we make those things more
and
possible.
we're now being sort of presented with this world where we're going to slowly convert from petrol cars to electric cars, which I would say on the one hand is going to be beneficial for local air quality, and I think also there might be an unexpected benefit in terms of noise. And I think the cities might become a lot quieter, and that might be a lot nicer. But obviously sort of massive things that are built, products that are built for private transport, everybody having one, it's not really the solution. How do you feel about electric cars?
Absolutely. I think there's this idea in the electric car scene that we're just going to transition. Everyone that had a petrol car is now going to have an electric car, and we just carry on in the same way. Is just wrong and naive. And clearly electric vehicles are an improvement on fossil fuel run vehicles. And where I work at the moment, we've just shifted over to fully electric. Brilliant. But just the level of consumption, the level of resources needed to manufacture that stuff. We can't have a system where we're just all making the same journeys just as we are before, with roads clogged up with electric cars. And you still get the tyre pollution, you've still got the manufacturing, the problems of the resources entailed in that. And so, we've got to be so much more efficient, and that means a complete game change. We need to be sharing these vehicles. We need to be using them a lot less than
I suppose
the norm at the moment.
The best that could outcome for that could be is if they were kind of self-driving electric taxis, that you just order, and that might be where it goes. But even that isn't necessarily great.
No, sure. I mean, clearly there are journeys people have to make that aren't easy to do in other ways, but. Yeah, Uber's the big player, isn't it, in terms of the idea of self-driving taxi service? Yeah, there's something to be said for it. The idea at the moment, most cars spend 95% of their life just sat taking up road space or in a garage somewhere and are unused is clearly just crazy. And so the idea that you're using a vehicle for maybe 80% of the time rather than 5% of the time does make sense. And so that kind of Uber approach does that. I think there will be some interesting experiments to look at, but I think politically people aren't. I think the main parties aren't sort of saying we've so fundamentally got to change the way we do things, and we're just scratching at the surface of it at the moment.
Yeah.
And it's an uncomfortable conversation, and that's why it's not really being had.
Yeah.
And I think Extinction Rebellion's slogan, tell the truth. Well, that's part of that truth that needs to be told, and isn't. We've just had the party political conference season at the moment, the Tories, Labour, and none of them are really comfortably saying we have to do everything differently.
It seems to be something that they turn on and off. When it's convenient. It's not a consistent narrative, right? Absolutely. It's not being mentioned now we've got COVID, but obviously it still matters. Now let's go that we've had some grim chat there. Let's talk about naked people.
Right, okay.
Were you an activist who took your clothes off, or were you a naturist who decided to protest?
No, definitely the first of those, an activist. I mean, for me, I've been promoting cycling and in all sorts of ways over the last 20 years, critical mass being one of those.
Oh, yeah. Is that still going?
It goes. It's not in Brighton. It's not at the moment. I think it is going in London a bit, and in various parts of the world. I mean, I love critical mass. I love that.
Would you like to explain critical mass briefly?
So critical mass is like a whole bunch of people jumping on bikes and going and becoming one mass. And usually not really quite knowing where they're going, cycling around the streets in the hundreds or thousands sometimes, and making cycling incredibly visible and quite fun in that. And for me, that was a big part of it. Let's make it fun. Let's not. Too often cycling is presented as some kind of sport, when actually, that's great that people do cycling as a sport, but actually what we need is to move around differently, and you know, just those trips to the shops or to school or to work need to be done differently, and that's not about a sport any more than walking is a sport.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if we're going to make it appealing, let's just make it fun. I think cycling could often either come across as too sporty or too earnest, and so I felt I wanted to engage in ways with people about cycling that made it feel fun and pushing boundaries, pushing people's own personal boundaries and pushing the boundaries in terms of how we use road space. Critical mass does that, although it would really wind a lot of people up the wrong way. And I did go on a couple of critical masses, and there was some hostility from sort of drivers and things. One of them ran over one of my girlfriend's coat. She dropped a coat and she ran over it, and it's like, and then I kind of was like, I don't really know if I want to be, you know, like doing this. Yeah, and that's how I felt. I thought, actually, I like part of what it is, but just antagonising people and the negative energy that can create it was problematic for me as well. So something like Bike Train, where you're again just a mass of people on the road, but you're going from somewhere to somewhere. So you're cycling. It's critical mass with a purpose in terms of with a journey in mind. And so that seemed like a great way to create that safety in numbers thing that critical mass does, and to enable people to experience that without antagonising people. It might antagonise some, but it was not kind of setting out to do that. So we did that up to Lewis Road, for instance, every day for 4 years. And it was very effective at raising the visibility of cycling and of creating a community atmosphere around people that were doing that journey. And the Naked Bike Ride, likewise, is kind of critical mass with no clothes on. But again, it with an organised route, and making that into a party, pushing people's boundaries, not just in terms of getting on a bike, but taking that a step further in terms of just stripping off. And I think the power of those sorts of events, because as a cyclist, you're often on your own and you're feeling very vulnerable. And so those sort of events are a counter to that, saying, well, if there's loads of us, we're invulnerable. We can, you know, we can take on the world. We're you know, we have this power in numbers, which is, and so there's a sort of poetry, if you like, of and performance of making yourself even more vulnerable by being naked, and turning it into even more of a party, and being, I think it's a powerful statement, and makes it fun. And so, you know, it's clearly, well, the rides I've organised, I mean, the Naked Bike Ride ones have tended to be by far the biggest, really, because it has an appeal to people, and it gets in the media as well.
It's very well received in Brighton. I mean, I think the council, who initially maybe had some scepticism about it, should probably be paying you now, because it's really, you know, it's always in the calendar, and it's a real sort of touristy event in some way, right? To some capacity, it's a real fun, Brighton, quirky, kind of mad thing to do. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it just raises the profile of cycling in a way that's fun. Things like the London to Brighton bike ride are brilliant, but the Naked Bike Ride does it in a completely.
So just to clarify for people that might not know, the Naked Bike Ride, I think it's kind of 3 things, and you can sort of pick and choose what you want, I suppose. So there's a sort of there's a highlighting vulnerability of cyclists. There is an element of the group, quite a large thing, that protests against sort of fossil fuel dependency and this kind of thing. And then what's the other thing, like sort of body
body positive. So and people come at it for all sorts of their own personal reasons and issues, and sometimes that can be very powerful.
What's the average now? I've not been on it in a few years.
About 400. I mean, I think the biggest we ever had was about 800, but 400 naked people on bikes, or semi-naked. We always say it's as bare as you dare. Actually, most people aren't naked, but it's pushing your own boundaries a bit. But yeah, it makes for a very big ride and a great atmosphere. And you know, I've never done anything in terms of organising events or anything that gets so many smiles and laughs and waves as the Naked Bike Ride. So it's definitely got that going for it.
Now there are many positives, but there obviously are some difficult aspects of the ride. We do have people that object to it. Obviously, that's a thing, and there is also the issue of making people feel comfortable. Sometimes if we cut down to it, there's a lot of men who will rock up with giant bloody cameras and then taking pictures of women. How has the ride kind of responded to these kind of challenges?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's a complete nightmare, a lot of that. It is so annoying dealing with those predatorial type of photographers that just come and we of course we want the ride to be photographed, but we want people to feel safe in it, emotionally safe, and to feel respected, and so close-up photography to be by consent. And so we really push that idea with posters and stewards talking to photographers, and just ask, please.
When you do talk to these people, how do they respond? Do they sort of not really care but just go along with it because you made them feel uncomfortable, or have they just not really thought it through?
Some of them just don't care at all, and it is just so depressing. But others haven't really thought about it, and some do respond positively. It's mixed. But the other thing that the other way we've responded is by trying to create a protected space for people to disrobe at the beginning, and so that it's hard then for photographers to get close up, and so we able to control access into that space, and that's the most vulnerable time, I think, before the ride starts. Once people are moving, I don't think they're so bothered. The cameras are at more of a distance, but it is a problem. And when we started the ride, people didn't have smartphones. There was no Facebook, or maybe there just was, but it hadn't really taken off. Social media hadn't really taken off, and obviously that's been a big game changer for all sorts of things, including this, and the ease with which images can be shared. So it means that the images of the ride do get passed around very freely, and there are positives to that. But there's also problems of consent where people actually, I don't want that image of me used in that way. And we can do our best around that, but we cannot control it.
Of course,
It's the world we live in. But people still want to come on the ride, I think, and we still do our utmost to make it feel a safe space, especially for women coming on the ride. And we do what we can on that, but I guess you can never do enough.
Has there been a shift in the reasons that people might go on the ride? Is the environmental message still very strong, or is it shifted towards more of a kind of just like fun, sort of liberating experience? Or
I think both. I mean, a couple of years ago we did it in partnership with Extinction Rebellion, and we had some brilliant flags and things. We always have a great number of flags on the Brighton ride that push the environmental message, and I think a lot of people want to come to it because it's a bit of a party. So I think it works on both those levels, and for some people, they just want to come and party and be part of a spectacle, and fair enough. And we want to push the environmental message, but we also don't want to lose the sort of fun element. And so for me, it's just one of many kind of actions and events that take place in the city and around the world, and it has that flavour, and it can't work on it. It's not an environmental campaign on its own. It's just one moment of many. Exactly.
I did the ride sort of 4 or 5 times, and I always used to wear this kind of disguise, and that was fine. And then one day I was cycling by the back of the Cowley Club, and there was this giant 15-foot square mural for the bike ride, and it was me and my bum.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
But cool. I was in disguise, so it was okay. And then the next year, I thought, do you know what? I'm just going to do it without a disguise. I'm just going to go for it because I want it. I really just love the kind of. I mean, when you come through the middle of town, and there's this moment when you go down North Street, and the speed picks up, and the crowds are really at the busiest there. Yeah, and you've got nothing on. I mean, it really is like it's insane. It's really quite a feeling. Anyway, so the last time I did it, I decided to not wear any clothes, and then just obviously everybody saw me. Like people at work saw me, and like. Yeah, I haven't done it since then. That was quite a while ago. I was thinking maybe I'd try the London one. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people do that. And a lot of people do wear wigs and sunglasses. You know, we've had teachers on it. And I know people who just don't want to be so visible with their faces. So, fair enough.
Yeah. So what have we talked about? Oh, I wanted to ask you. So what about? I think I probably know your answers on this, but we've got a lot of electric bikes around now. We've got a lot of these electric scooters, and the weird things happening in Brighton where people are riding electric scooters and they're basically commuting on them, I think, most of the time. And the police, because it's illegal, it's technically illegal to ride these, and the police are just sort of handing out flyers saying what you're doing is illegal and then walking away, which is a bit odd. But it obviously demonstrates that the police are underfunded along with everybody else. I know that this country were Paris had introduced the bike rental scheme 15 years before London, or however long it was. I was in Poland a couple of years ago, and they have these scooters, and you can just rent them on an app really quickly. Electric scooters everywhere. You can take them. There's little zones that you're allowed to ride them in. You can kind of ride them wherever you want, and then you just leave them wherever you want. Very handy, very cheap. This country's just so behind the time. Well, how do you feel about this technology? Is this part of the solution, or is it more? I think it is.
I think. I'm a great fan of just the normal bicycle. It's human powered transport. Is great, but I think there are limits of that for a lot of people, and somewhere like Brighton's very hilly, and electric bikes are part of the solution to that. If it means people getting rid of their cars and moving around more sustainably, then I think electric scooters can be part of that. I think that the law's got its knickers in a twist over it, really, and I think the police understand that there's popular support for these things in terms of people just getting on and using them, and the law has got to catch up on it. But I think it's part of the solution. Yeah. Clearly it can be a bit scary if you're walking along and some of them go incredibly fast. And
they do, yeah.
There probably does need to be some sort of proper regulation over it. But just saying that they're illegal is
so I think because
helpful.
These scooters are not. It's kind of the fact that some of them go so fast is. Because they're not legal, right? Because the bikes have the 15.5 limiter on whatever.
Which I do think is too low as well. I think if you're going to make the standard speed limit around city centres 20 miles an hour, then let bikes go at 20 miles an hour before
absolutely,
and scooters, I don't know. Probably the same, really. But that can sound fast to people, but I think we're in a transition. A lot of these things should be more on the road and not on the pavement. And I think politically it's been easier to put cycle tracks on pavements because you're not taking space away from car users. And so
perish the thought.
Yeah, exactly. And I think actually, you need to have the political guts to take a bit of space away from cars and put these things on the road. We've got the depressing example in Brighton recently of the Old Shoreham Road, where a perfectly good cycle lane on the road, which should have been a model for the future, really has now just been taken up because it was unpopular with car users. Shows how certain politicians didn't have the guts to just push that, and I think
Brighton is a very strange place. I cycle around Brighton, and you sort of have some examples of just beautiful design that works for everybody involved, and then other things where you just think I'm endangering myself by following the rules of the road. And obviously cyclists, I think in the press here locally, if anybody still reads the local press, but they've cyclists do get a bit of flack for not obeying the rules. But the thing is, the rules sometimes endanger yourself, sometimes are very inconvenient to cars and other people if you're following them. It just seems very strange. Why have we got this massively disjointed system?
Yeah, absolutely. Partly because I think most roads haven't been designed with cyclists in mind traditionally, and there's a catching up there. Most cycling infrastructure that's been put in has been completely piecemeal without any big plan, and so it's not coherent. To be fair, the council locally are, and a lot around the country, are now developing a local walking and cycling infrastructure plan, which is meant to be more joined up, but it's kind of probably 20 years later than it should have been, when a lot of the infrastructure's gone in. And so, cyclists are left on, bits of pavement here and roads there, and, why can't you turn left on on a red light.
Yeah.
Like
so
you can
Boris
in Paris.
wanted to do that, didn't he? He wanted to put that in London, and then I think it didn't go through.
Yeah, and then you get problems of being a risk-averse culture at one level. That another level, we just want to go for it. And so it's very confused. And ultimately, I mean, with the Old Shoreham Road, just a very vocal car lobby.
Yeah,
and car user
which we had
lobby.
On the seafront as well, didn't we? With
Absolutely,
with that little section there.
I mean, Valley Gardens is absolutely brilliant the way that's, but it's just still years after it's been flagged up as a problem. It's not joined up yet between the St Peter's Church section and the seafront, and you just left. What
I take that route every week to go to work, and I'm like, I'm still trying to figure out what the council is expecting me to do. Mm-hmm. That's convenient as well. And it's not obvious, not immediately obvious.
No. I mean, given that it was going to be a couple of years before the next bit goes in, because there are plans for the next phase, so it will happen. But it's been so contentious, and it's been kicked around.
Going on there. Some car chainsaw wielding people are coming to take us down.
It's been 15, 20 years of talking about that route, and at one point Labour came in at one election saying they were going to scrap the whole thing and not do it, and then they changed their mind, and then it got delayed, and then every time there's a change of administration, it gets kicked around. And it has been, and then you've got the Tourism Alliance opposing it, and petitions. It's very difficult, I think, for councillors and other politicians who are wanting to make these changes to do it in a way that has broad support, because they become so contentious.
It's incredibly depressing. I cycled a couple of years ago with my friend. We cycled from the Hook of Holland to the centre of Amsterdam. Right. And we arrived in Amsterdam at rush hour, and obviously, it's a different system. Cars are all over the road. I don't know what's going on. That whole journey, I think there was only 2 roads that we weren't basically completely away from the traffic on a cycle lane. And going through Amsterdam at rush hour was absolutely fine, even though we didn't know where we were going and what we were doing. And nobody's wearing a helmet. Yeah. Nobody's crashing. Everything's safe. Yeah. And you just think, and you come back. I came back to London, and I was just like cycling through London, and I was just like, oh my God. It's so wrong.
Yeah. We're so years and years behind. And with the climate emergency, it's like we can't keep putting this off. We've got to make the change. Why doesn't every road that's wide enough have a cycle lane on it? Why are we arguing the toss over each individual lane rather than saying every road's going to have a cycle lane, unless for some very good reason it can't? And the argument should be the other way. But we're half a century behind the Netherlands and Denmark and countries like that. And
it sounds like you're not too sure we're going to catch up anytime soon.
No, I mean, there is good stuff happening, and there is more money going in than was. But the Old Shoreham Road is just a depressing reminder that it's stop-start. It's
Are you? Because honestly, I've become so disillusioned and burnt out with these sorts of things that I now just don't engage with them. Do you worry that will happen to you? Or are you just going to plod on bravely?
I see myself plodding on. That's all right, and you win a few battles and you lose a few, and you keep plodding on. And I think we're lucky in Brighton is that there are enough people who are doing that, and I think they know that behind them is loads of people who maybe don't have the time or the energy or to get engaged in that, but they'll there's that feeling of support from a wider section, I think. So,
I think you probably have much more support than you're aware of in that context. Definitely, there's a lot of goodwill in this city to those sorts of things.
I think so, and a lot of people just don't want to get bogged down with arguing the toss. Understandable. But yeah.
Well, thank you very much for coming on the show, Duncan. I apologise to our listeners for the sound issues. We've got some, chainsaw work going on. Something's going on down below us. Is there anything else that you'd like to promote or tell us about before we send you on your way?
Well, I mentioned the Bike Hub earlier. I mean, that's, do if you're in Brighton and Hove or nearby and you ride a bike, then do pop by and see us. We're on St Martin's Place, and it's usually a nice atmosphere there. And it's part of building a community of people that cycle. And yeah,
presumably you've not had a naked bike ride for a couple of years, is that right?
There was one this year. Actually, I took a back seat this year. I did have a bit of a break from it, partly because I just thought I need a bit of a rest. But there's a great team on that, and it happened in August, but there hadn't been one for 2 years, actually.
Yeah.
So I think there will be one next year. So, yeah, look out for that.
I always remember I did one when it was absolutely freezing and there was rain.
Yeah, we've had
about 200 people. It was horrible.
It's amazing that 200 people turn up, isn't it, for something like that? But yeah,
actually, the first one I did, I made the classic mistake where I had all these logos on my body, but I didn't wear any sunscreen.
Yeah,
and then I got the sunburn, and then when I wiped my logos off, they were there in this sort of anti-tattoo, and they were there for like months.
Yeah, I had that as well. Yeah, you go to the local swimming pool,
you
still got your slogans,
sweat not oil.
Yeah, so I think I think in Brighton we can make cycling. We do make cycling fun and friendly, and we can make it more so. And I think an interesting area at the moment is all the people doing deliveries and things by bike. I think they becoming a bit of a voice as well, and increasingly people are doing their jobs on bikes, and I think that's really exciting. So yeah, if you're not already on a bike, then give it a go, I would say, and there's plenty of support for you out there, including at the Bike Hub and elsewhere.
Absolutely, and we've perhaps said some cynical things, but it's not the worst city to cycle around by far.
No,
it's certainly a lot better than my hometown. I've only cycled around it really, so it's definitely a thing to do.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much for coming on the Husk, Duncan, and we'll put up some links to the Bike Hub and Naked Bike Ride and all that kind of stuff.
Cool.
In the show. And if there's anything else, let me know.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.